Hello, everyone. My name is Karma Tensum. I'm with the Tibetan Children's Education Foundation. We are doing this new video series called Voices for Tibet, in which we are trying to capture support for Tibet, for Tibetan culture, and even for Tibetan children's education. The foundation that I work for, Tibetan Children's Education Foundation, its mission itself is to help preserve Tibetan culture and share anything about it. So today I have another Tibet supporter, a very old TCEF sponsor, Elinore Evans, with us. Elinore and her husband John joined the TCEF team of sponsors way back in 2004. They started sponsoring a child, and then they graduated to sponsoring a Tibetan elder called Grandpa Kelsang up there in Dharamsala, and they continue to be in his life even today. But for me, I really got to know Elinore and John so much better this past year when we were all fellow pilgrims on a TCEF tour called The Footsteps of the Buddha. Elinore is the executive director of the Paleol Buddhist Temple in Richfield, Ohio. With her background in Buddhist studies, I look forward so much to a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Elinore, for being on the program. Can I begin by requesting you to tell a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I became involved in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, spiritual practices back in 1997. On the heels of my father's passing away, I had a transformative experience that began during a 21-day period when he was in a coma. And I had been reading a wonderful book that I highly recommend called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, Sogyal. And I had been doing some spiritual practice that was not in the Buddhist tradition because I hadn't had any exposure to that tradition up until that point. I grew up in the Christian Presbyterian tradition. My mother was a Sunday school teacher, and I was very involved in our church. And I had a strong spiritual bent from a very, very young age, and always seeking my path, and which I didn't really feel ultimately was the Christian path, but I hadn't really found my path. And so I had the fortune of meeting a teacher out in Boulder in 1997 in the Nyingma school of the Tibetan tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, receiving teachings, and all of a sudden a whole new door opened up for me to walk through and start engaging in these practices that were really quite profound and moving, and I could immediately feel the effects of the practices. And then slowly over time, due to someone else in our circle here in Cleveland, Ohio, where I live, related to the Dalai Lama, actually, we had journeyed to Pittsburgh to hear some teachings that he had given on the Heart Sutra. Mm-hmm. And then one of the members of this group ended up going to a retreat in upstate New York and inviting the senior teacher, who is known as a Khenpo. A Khenpo is somebody who has had at least 9 years of training, sort of like a PhD in Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, and so forth. And then on top of that, they become a Lopan after that if they graduate. And then after another at least 3-year period, if they are highly qualified, they may become a Khenpo, which is a very special title. So the senior teacher, who was a Khenpo, came to Ohio and founded the local Paleol Buddhist temple back in 1999 that I was a part of ever since, and then stepped into the role as executive director about 1 year ago. And but in the meantime, I became fascinated with the Tibetan language. And I had an opportunity to go to Rochester, which is only a 4-hour drive from where I live here, and take a seminar in classical Tibetan, the language. I wanted to learn the alphabet. I thought, well, if I could learn the alphabet, I could have a little more confidence in the recitation and the practices, because we do our recitations mostly in Tibetan using transliterated Roman characters.
Right.
So as a result of this exploration through this seminar, I became so fascinated. I felt like a whole new window had opened up into a whole new universe through the language. And I began to study long distance through phone lessons and seminars when I could. When he came back to Rochester, this was David Curtis, the Tibetan Language Institute. He's based in Montana, as you know.
Yeah.
And and my initial interest was really just selfish in a way, because I wanted to, when I did the practices, I wanted to make a stronger connection with the actual prayers.
Yes, of course.
And then I learned how to type in Tibetan, and then I became useful because I could actually help type up some of the new texts that we were practicing. And slowly over time, I engaged in helping little bits of editing here and there. And then I studied, on Skype, long distance. I studied conversational Tibetan with an organization based in Dharamsala, where Grandpa Khalsang lives.
Yes.
And I started studying conversational Tibetan, which is really a whole different animal. Classical classical Tibetan is more like Latin. It's very formal. People don't speak that way. And conversational Tibetan is very colloquial and very, very different. But the two they complemented one another, because after I started studying the colloquial Tibetan and actually traveling then to Dharamsala for some immersion study, in addition to the Skype study, I became more comfortable with the language and seeing it on paper and seeing the expressions on paper. It sort of one complemented the other, and in a way that I didn't anticipate, but I just thought it would be wonderful to be able to hear the lamas give teachings live in Tibetan and have some grasp of what they were saying. So all of this sort of led to then currently what I'm doing is I'm on a team with some other translators, one person in Pittsburgh, and our Kempo, who is right now he's in France at one of the monastery retreat centers there, but he is Payul Kempo.
Okay.
And he was asked by the head of our lineage to put together two volumes that are in Tibetan of the Payul prayers, and to translate all of those. So we're on a team together working on this project. We're just getting ready probably in the next month or so to finish volume 1.
Wow.
And then we'll be embarking on volume 2. Okay. And this will be available both electronically and eventually in print format, and is a legacy because it is the particular collection that comes down from Tuku Tupsang, who was head of the monastery in Tibet, the Payul Mother Monastery in Tibet, until he passed away recently. We're still in the 49-day period after he passed, just right now.
Right.
So that's kind of a summary of who I am and what I'm up to. And Karma came to Cleveland back in 2004, I believe, to some friends of ours' home, and we were invited to that home to hear this presentation. And John and I were really captivated. Right. We just thought this was an amazing opportunity, and what a wonderful mission to educate the children in exile. And I think at that point that elder program was nascent, or maybe not quite existing.
No, it hadn't started.
It wasn't even existing. Right.
So, but Elinore, you're right. I remember clearly we came in 2004 with the late India Supra. We did something called the nationwide Momos Road Tour, where we were traveling and trying to raise awareness of Tibetan children's education. And so it was our common friend Karen Algier who lives up there in Cleveland. And so I met you and John there. But I was really fascinated to hear your story of how you crossed paths with Tibetan Buddhism. I knew, of course, that you translated and you helped prepare texts. But one thing I didn't know is I didn't know that you actually typed in Tibetan. That is so impressive, Elinore, because I've tried it myself. I know as you know, we have these superscripts and subscripts. So it's not as straightforward as typing in English. And so when I hear that you learned to type in Tibetan, my admiration for you soars even higher. And then one good advantage of doing this interview with me is we can even practice a little bit of colloquial spoken Tibetan. Chirankusu dewa yimbe.
Oh, Depayin.
Oh, there you go. See. But Elena, I wanted to pick up this thread on this fascinating topic of Tibetan scriptures and how valuable they are as learning resources in the Buddhist world. I know that even the Himalayan kingdoms of Bhutan, Sikkim, Ladakh, although their native language is different, they speak Bhutanese, Sikkimese, or Ladakhi. But when it comes to learning Buddhism, when it comes to learning the religious texts, they all fall back on the Tibetan texts. Mm-hmm. And I know in one of our emails that we shared, we talked about how precious the Tibetan texts are and how miraculous the translation from Sanskrit to Tibetan was before the Sanskrit texts themselves got totally destroyed by the Mughal invaders. Can you shed a little bit more light, because I know that you know more about this than even I do?
Well, the Tibetan language was codified for the purpose of translating the scriptures. It was an oral language, and it was also written, of course, back in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, but it hadn't been codified universally so that everyone would be on the same page with the alphabet and so forth. And so there were these councils that took place, and I don't remember the exact dates, but I remember there were three councils.
Yep.
That codified the language. And then was it King Tritson Detson that sent Shantarak Kempo Shantarak Shita and Vairotsana and others, the top Lotsa was the top scholar,
yes,
to India to study Sanskrit. First of all, they had to learn the Sanskrit language. And then second of all, they had to translate all of the Buddhist scriptures that were in Sanskrit into Tibetan. Right. And what's so amazing is that this took place over a 100-year period, which is, when you think about it, it's just rather extraordinary. The whole to do what was existing back then, the whole canon, so to speak. And then, of course, they were all brought back to Tibet, and they were, the way that the scriptures were printed then, and still today in some cases, were woodblock prints on two sides. They're called paches, and they're long rectangular pages that are printed on two sides, unbound, and easily wrapped and transported and carried, of course. And so then, as you mentioned, some years after this it occurred, then the Mughal invaders invaded India and destroyed many of these Sanskrit scriptures. True. So that the only editions that remained were in fact the ones that had been translated. And then I think some of them were maybe retranslated back into Sanskrit. I'm not sure, but I think that also took place. Right. So the Tibetan culture preserves these teachings, these scriptures. Yes. And both from the Buddha, from the original teachings of the Buddha, and then later the teachings that emerged during the time of Guru Rinpoche, also known as Padmasambhava in Sanskrit, who really enabled Buddhism to take root and flourish in Tibet and in the Himalayan region as a whole, Mongolia, Sikkim, Bhutan, and that whole area. He was instrumental in allowing that to occur, because there were obstacles that had to be overcome. True. That he overcame. And many of the teachings that he had been able to grasp and fully learn were not necessarily appropriate for the time and place that he was living in. And so he ended up hiding these teachings away in different forms. They're called terma. Terma means treasure. And they were hidden away in rocks and in the earth and in space and in water and all kinds of ways. And he wrote a whole tome, I guess, on how these would then be later discovered, rediscovered for a particular time and place. And in the Nyingma tradition, which is one of the four schools of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the treasure revealers are an integral part of our traditions.
Yes.
And those teachings that were revealed through that revelation where they rediscovered are much more recent, typically. I mean, maybe 18th century, 17th century, and so forth, which is, compared to the Buddhist time, which is, a lot more recent, and particularly designed for our time, for what's called the Kali Yuga, the degenerate time that we're living in, where we can look around and see the challenges that we're all facing in one form or another. And so many of these teachings are now being revealed and practiced in many of the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions, but particularly in the Nyingma tradition. So preserving the Tibetan culture also preserves the passing on of these scriptures from teacher to student in an unbroken lineage. And lineage is so important in the Tibetan tradition, because if they're not passed on in an unbroken lineage, then the authenticity is lost.
True.
So to maintain the authenticity of the teachings, they have to be passed down authentically from teacher to student over time.
See, Elena, I'm so grateful. See, these are really fascinating. I hope that some of our viewers will find them really interesting. The concept of lineage, the concept of termas, the concept of tertens, all really fascinating. And I'm glad that, you are there studying Buddhism and even teaching it. Give me a sense of what is it like in Ohio, like as far as the Tibetan spiritual practice, as far as Buddhist practice. How big is the Sangha? How big is the interest in Tibet, in Buddhism? What is it like being in Ohio?
Well, it's particular, during the COVID era that we're in right now, it's sort of anomalous. This is sort of not very typical.
Okay.
But before COVID, we had a sort of a small, steady group of people that would come for regular practice. And we have a resident Lama that has now was appointed 2 years ago. He has one more year as a 3-year appointment. Mm-hmm. And by Namdrolling Monastery, by the administration of the monastery in India, southern India. And so he would also be able to be here leading our practices. And we would gather maybe at least 3 or 4 times a week. And also on very special days called lunar days. The calendar is lunar based. So we would gather on lunar based days, and it would change week to week and month to month. On the 10th lunar day, the 25th lunar day, the 10th lunar day, we do practices relating to Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, whom I mentioned earlier. And on the 25th lunar day, we do practices relating to dakinis. So dakinis is a Sanskrit word. Khandro would be the Tibetan word for the translation would be skygoer, and they are the female divine emanations. And the 25th day is considered the ideal day to do these practices relating to the female spiritual emanations. And then there are some other days like Medicine Buddha Day on the 8th lunar day, and the full moon day, new moon day, and so forth. So, but we would also gather on weekends because people are free on weekends. And so that's a good time to come together. During the COVID era, we got involved in Zoom teachings, and something rather fantastic happened.
Okay.
Because people from all over the world wanted to join in, from mainland China, from Taiwan, from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Japan, from Europe, Canada, and so forth. All of a sudden, well, depending on people's internet connections, right? People were able to join in teachings, and our spiritual director, Khenchen Sewan Gyatso Rinpoche, came from India to Ohio during the COVID era. And normally he's here just for a few weeks and then he's traveling, but because of COVID, he's been here in residence for some months, many months now, and giving teachings on Zoom. And so we've had up to 800 people on our Zoom teachings and practices, especially for the teachings. So all of a sudden we have a huge international Sangha that we never had before.
See, Elena, that is so exciting, and it's so encouraging because, in some way, COVID, Zoom, it gives another dimension to our lives. It sort of frees us from the limitations of geography. And so taking advantage of, the little part which you say, I also wanted to make a pitch and say that even on this Voices for Tibet program, it totally frees us of geography. You could be anywhere. I'm talking with Elinore. I'm in Montana. Elinore is in Ohio. And I've talked with other people who are back in the East. So my message is, anyone listening to this Voices for Tibet program, if you have a heart and an empathy for Tibet, if you want to say something for Tibet, for the Tibetan cause or for the Tibetan culture, please reach out to me. My email is super simple. It's my first name, Karma, followed by the foundation acronyms, TCEF. So it's karma, tcef@gmail.com. And I look forward to talking or Zooming with people from different parts of the world. But Elinore, back to our conversation. One of the emails that you sent me is this beaming photograph of you up in Dharamsala. So I want to talk about your visit to Dharamsala, visiting Grandpa Kelsang and the late Ama Chungden. She's no more. But tell me a little bit about that visit and what it was like visiting this Tibetan elder whom you and John had sponsored over the years.
Well, it was very interesting. I wasn't sure how to find him.
Okay.
First of all, and very out of serendipity, one of my teachers knew Ama Chungden. And in fact, I think there was some distant relationship, like an aunt, great aunt. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember exactly. But he was able to help me locate them. Oh. And he was actually excited to come along because I don't think he had seen his aunt. I'm going to say she was the aunt. I'm not exactly sure, cousin or something. Yeah, in a long time. And so anyway, so we went into the town, the local town there, and purchased some gifts. A traditional kata. Is a white scarf that you maybe have seen presented to somebody like the Dalai Lama, or it's actually presented to anyone. If you haven't seen them in a long time and you're meeting for the first time, you would offer them a kata. It's just a traditional offering. And then also I had purchased, I think, some offering bowls, some new offering bowls to present as a gift.
Yes.
And so we wandered into that settlement area that I think you've been to, right? Yes. But we still didn't know where within the settlement area. So we had to sort of ask. And of course, I wasn't fluent in Tibetan, so I had to have somebody with me who spoke Tibetan to actually ask where they were and find them. And so anyway, we did finally find them. And it was so wonderful. They made us just this fabulous Tibetan tea, which is kind of like chai, but I think it might have been the salt butter tea. I'm not sure. I think that's usually what they like to drink. Yeah. And we had a visit, and then my teacher translated because again I was just in the process of learning. It was in the early stages, and I was not at all fluent. I could catch words here and there, but and so it was very special to be able to be there in person, see them, make offerings, and take away a picture, and have him in my prayers. And of course, I knew he said I would be in his prayers.
Yeah, always, yes.
And so forth. So and the Tibetans like him. Did such hard work when they were in exile. They didn't really have much choice of what kind of work to do. So typically they worked on the roads, very backbreaking, tough road work. And then, you get to a point where you can't work anymore, and they don't have retirement like we do in the US and Social Security. So they need sponsors to support them. So anyway, we were just so happy that we can continue to support him and during these elder years of his life.
Absolutely. And Elinore, you made a really good point about the elders program that we tried to run. The Tibetan elders that are now in exile, they've just led such incredible lives. And I know this firsthand because my own parents, they lived their life. And At TCEF, we are not saying that there's no one to support the Tibetan elders. That's simply not true. Tibetan children are good. They will take care of the parents. The Tibetan government in exile does their best. But there are special Tibetans who, might be a monk or a nun who's never married, or now in their old age, they don't have substantial sources of support. So for all of them, TCEF elder sponsors like John and Elinore, they're such a lifeline. And I cannot thank you enough for supporting this Tibetan elder over all these years. So Elinore, thank you for your love. Thank you for your empathy. I wanted to request you to be a further voice for Tibet today and just convey a message of how folks with a good heart for Tibet and the Tibetan culture, how can they best help us at this time in the history?
If you're willing to be a sponsor, it's really not very expensive. The Tibetan Elders Program, I think, is $420 a year or so. Is that right?
That's right, $35
on a monthly basis. On a monthly basis, that's $35 or $40. Yeah, exactly. And the children, the other option is to support one of the children who live in hostels in local communities, like Clementown. And it was such a wonderful experience to go to Clementown on this trip that I went on, this pilgrimage, and see the children, because we had supported a young man who had since graduated from the school. And so they have a youth hostel there that with kids, I think from maybe 5 years old on up, a young group all the way up through high school, who then live there, but then they go to school every day and come back to the hostel. And they also have education at the hostel. They learn about the culture, they learn the songs, they learn the dances, they learn about their own tradition. They engage in prayers every morning and probably every evening. And they have a lot of fun together, it's like one big giant family. And so having a chance to interact with them was so special. And so anybody that's inspired can be a sponsor, either of an elder or of a youngster. And if you don't have the means to do that, you can still make a donation to TCEF, and it will, collectively, it will go towards supporting the Tibetans in one form or another. Sometimes they're in between and betwixt, and that little money can tide them over to finding a new sponsor or something of this nature. So it's a great opportunity. If you sponsor a youngster, you get to communicate. You get to write letters.
And Grandpa Kelsang can't do that, but he keeps you in his prayers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right. And
so you can develop a relationship. Yes. And for when we were on the trip, many of the people that were on the trip were sponsors of the students, and they got to meet their students for the first time.
True.
And so that was an amazing experience, witnessing this connection, because of course they had been corresponding long distance, and then to meet in person, very special opportunity.
Right. And then Elinore, thank you again for that plug also. And whenever someone makes a plug about supporting Tibetan education, I latch on immediately, because my own life has been transformed because of education. Elinore, I came to India when I was really very young, but my whole education was sponsored by the grace of His Holiness the Dalai Lama through 5 Danish aunties, and then in high school, a Swiss gentleman called Walter Reist. And the education that I received totally transformed my life, to the point where I'm able to recycle a little bit of their kindness through the work that I do with the Tibetan Children's Foundation. So thank you for that plug. Thank you again, Elinore, for being this voice for Tibet. Please say hello to John for me.
Oh, I will. Indeed.
Everybody listening on to this program, many of you are Tibet supporters with the love and empathy for Tibet. Tashidele, and thank you always for your love and support to Tibet and Tibetan causes.
Well, I'm honored to have the opportunity, Karma, and that John and I were so grateful to be even on the interrupted trip, the trip that didn't totally materialize, and hope that another one maybe in the future will materialize without interruption.
Absolutely. Tashidele, Tujiche.
All right, Tujiche.